the Ukrainian army has over the winter prepared and built up well over 35 specially created assault brigades that specialize in breaching operations. And these units have so far not been seen anywhere, so they could be put in at any location and nobody would know. And when we look at parallels in history, there are some that are geographically closer and some that are further away. If we look at those that are close by, then naturally one of them is the big one, naturally the one that everybody knows about. Maybe it's not exactly the same situation. I'm thinking about Operation Barbarossa here, which happened in 1941, because that was somewhat of a surprise attack against the Red Army. Up until that point, naturally, the Germans and the Russians, they had been allies, but nevertheless, a lot of these things ring true anyway. The Germans, they had been building up their forces along the front lines for months, and it is impossible for the other side not to see what is happening. When you gather 3 or 4 million men somewhere, usually they do leave some traces behind, so to say. But at the same time, it could be that it's all some form of a diplomatic game that is being played. Maybe there are simply some actions that you want from your opposing side, and by having a troop buildup, you might make them think that you're about to attack, even though you're not, and you might pressure them for certain things, which also shows that Stalin at that point, he saw that there was a risk, but at the same time, he didn't want to provoke the Germans. So up until the last moment, even though seeing this troop buildup, he didn't use it as an excuse to break off diplomatic relations or stop all of this trade that had been stipulated in the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, meaning that Russian or Soviet resources were being shipped by, or rather sent by the railway wagons in enormous quantities up until the last day before the invasion. So this is something that you never know how this offensive of yours will be perceived, how the troop buildup will be perceived. The Ukrainians here, it was clear that the troop buildup was happening in Zaporizhia. These other, but the Belgorod, for example, they only put in non-Ukrainian troops fighting over there. At the Kreminna-Svatove sector, there was very little activity. There were some counterattacks happening on the flanks of Bakhmut, with the Ukrainians managing to slightly turn the tide over there and advance on both the north and the south side of the city. But nevertheless, it wasn't. You could see that wasn't where the main forces were going at the moment. There were some speculations that maybe the Ukrainians would be a little bit bold and do a crossing over the Dnipro River in the Kherson region under Novakakhovka, because above Novakakhovka the Dnipro River is so wide that there is practically no chance of any large-scale amphibious operations, as the Ukrainian army simply doesn't have enough amphibious equipment to make those types of crossings. But below Novakakhovka, the river really turns into several streams, so to say, and even though the terrain maybe is not the easiest, there could have been a chance to breach through there. But the Russians clearly saw what was happening, and once they knew that the counteroffensive was close enough to start, they simply destroyed the Novakakhovka Dam, causing an enormous ecological disaster.
Well, yes, I mean, that's going to add, excuse me, that's going to add to the problems a year hence when there are no crops.
Yes, and they knew that they were going to pay some price for it themselves when it comes to irrigation, even in the occupied Crimean Peninsula. it was heavily dependent on the so-called North Crimean Canal that takes water from the reservoir next to Nova Kakhovka. But they were clearly willing to sacrifice that in order to flood that region and make it impenetrable for the Ukrainian forces. At least for now, the water will subside. It is not a permanent feature of that part of Ukraine that the water will be standing that high always. However, it will take another 10 days or so before the water really subsides, and then these areas, they will have been turned into some form of a swamp with needing another 4, 5, or even 6 weeks to dry up, making it traversable for heavy equipment and tanks.
Adam, as usual, the clock has interrupted, so I'm going to have to ask you to pause there, but we will pick it up next time. There we are. I've had to interrupt Adam almost in mid-sentence, but fear not, if you join us next time, as we hope you will, we'll pick up the story. In the meantime, thank you for watching Poland Daily History.